The classroom was silent, except for the squeak of chalk. Mrs. Ashley Reynolds, a white math teacher with a smug smile, turned to the board and wrote a monstrous equation filled with Greek symbols and fractions. Then she looked straight at Malik Johnson, an 11-year-old black boy sitting in the third row. "Since you think you're so brilliant, Malik, why don't you solve this? Let's see if genius runs in your family." A few students snickered. Malik froze, his small hands gripping the edge of his desk. He hadn't done anything, just solved the problem faster than she expected earlier that morning. Now this was punishment. Mrs. Reynolds folded her arms. "Come on, child. Show the class how smart you really are." The symbols blurred for a second as Malik's chest tightened. He could feel every eye on him, waiting for him to fail. But then he heard his late father's voice in his mind. "Breathe, son. Math is music. Just find the rhythm." He stood, trembling but calm. Every step toward the board felt like a war he didn't start, but had to win. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. At home, Malik's world was quiet, just a sough from the fridge and the sound of his mother, Imani Johnson, returning late from her hospital shift. While other kids slept, Malik sat under a dim lamp at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, solving problems from his late father's old university textbooks. His father, Dr. Darius Johnson, had been a math professor before passing away from cancer. Every night, Malik still whispered his father's photo, "I'll finish what we started, Dad." He didn't play video games or hang out much. He didn't have fancy clothes or new shoes. But he had something rare, focused curiosity and a mind that never stopped asking why. At school, teachers often dismissed him as too quiet. Classmates saw only a shy kid with thick glasses, not the boy who could see patterns in chaos. Malik didn't want to be special. He just wanted to belong. He wasn't just solving equations. He was trying to rebuild the connection he'd lost, one formula at a time. Malik stood at the whiteboard, the chalk trembling slightly in his hand. The symbols looked impossible. Partial derivatives, integrals, and letters that belonged in college, not middle school. Mrs. Reynolds leaned back on her desk, arms crossed, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "Don't worry, Malik. I'm sure you'll try your best." The class chuckled. Malik didn't answer. He closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and began to write. First, he separated variables, something he'd seen in his father's notes. Then came substitution. Step by step, his voice calm, explaining as he worked. Within minutes, the laughter faded. The room went silent. Even Mrs. Reynolds' smirk vanished as she realized every line was correct. Malik's hand moved faster, chalk squeaking rhythmically until the final answer appeared, neat, complete, and flawless. He put the chalk down and said quietly, "That's the general solution, ma'am. You can check it if you want." Mrs. Reynolds stared at the board, speechless. Her face flushed red, not with pride, but humiliation. Then, with sharp movements, she erased the entire board. "Sit down," she snapped, "and hand me that notebook of yours. Let's see where you copied all this from." Malik froze as his father's old notebook was snatched from his hands. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. That evening, Malik sat at the kitchen table, silent. His mother, Imani, could tell something was wrong the moment she saw his face. "Baby, what happened?" she asked softly. When he told her that his teacher called him a liar, erased his work, and took his notebook, Imani's calm expression shattered. She set down her purse. She took what? That book belonged to your father. By morning, she was standing in front of the principal's desk, still in her nurse's uniform, eyes fierce with exhaustion and anger. "You let a teacher steal from my son and call him a cheat?" she said, her voice trembling but strong. Principal Mason Clark tried to calm her. "Mrs. Johnson will review the matter. Please understand its procedure. Procedure doesn't give anyone the right to humiliate a child for being smart," she snapped. "You want proof? Fine. Let's prove it." By the end of that day, An arrangement was made. Malik would take a supervised test at the university where his father once taught. This time, no one could deny the truth. The university classroom was cold and echoing, the kind of room built for grown-ups, not for an 11-year-old boy clutching a pencil. Across from him sat Dr. Naomi Carter, head of mathematics, a calm black woman with silver glasses and kind eyes. "Malik," she said softly, "I knew your father. He was one of the sharpest minds I ever met. Let's see what you got, okay?" Mrs. Reynolds sat in the corner, arms crossed, pretending confidence but tapping her shoe nervously. "Dr. Carter wrote the first problem on the board, an advanced calculus question most college students would fear." Malik read it once, then began writing. Step by step, his voice steady. Substitution, derivation, integration. Minutes passed. Each problem grew harder. Each time, Malik stayed calm. He wasn't just solving equations. He was speaking the only language his father had taught him, logic, truth, and beauty. When he finished the final question, Dr. Carter compared his work with her notes. Then she turned toward the room. "This child didn't memorize. He understands. He's gifted beyond his years." Mrs. Reynolds' face went pale. The humiliation she planned had just become her own. "You owe this boy an apology," Dr. Carter said sharply. Mrs. Reynolds said nothing. Word spread fast. By the next morning, the entire school knew what had happened. How Malik had stunned university professors and proven every word of his teacher's doubt wrong. But the story didn't end there. An investigation followed. Parents spoke up. Students came forward. One by one, stories surfaced of kids Mrs. Reynolds had mocked, graded unfairly, or punished for attitude. It wasn't just Malik. She had been doing this for years. Principal Mason Clark called Malik's mother to his office. "Mrs. Johnson," he began carefully, "the district has decided to place Mrs. Reynolds on leave pending termination." Imani folded her arms. "So she finally faces the same humiliation she gave my son." When Mrs. Reynolds came to collect her things, the halls were quiet. No student spoke. No one met her eyes. As she passed Malik's classroom, she paused for a second, but he didn't look up. He was at his desk, focused on his notebook, writing equations as if nothing else in the world existed. For once, silence wasn't fear, it was justice. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't fight, but ends careers built on arrogance. Mrs. Reynolds left the building and never came back. The next week felt lighter, like a storm had finally passed. Malik walked through the school hallway, not as the quiet boy no one noticed, but as the student everyone respected. Even teachers who'd once ignored him now smiled when he passed. That afternoon, he came home to find his mother waiting with a letter in her hand. "It's from a university," Imani said, her voice trembling with pride. She handed it to him. The letter offered Malik a scholarship to attend weekend advanced math classes, the same halls his father once taught in. For a moment, Malik couldn't speak. He just stared at the paper, the words blurring through tears. He walked to his father's old study, opened the worn notebook that had caused so much trouble, and whispered, "We did it, Dad." Imani stood by the door, smiling softly. "You didn't just prove them wrong, baby," she said. "You proved what's possible." Malik looked up, eyes bright. "I just want every kid like me to know we belong here too." He went back to his desk, pencil in hand, ready for his next challenge. "If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.